The editor's going to be looking for your word choices. Do you say, my beloved is sad? Do you say, my beloved is worried? No, we say, my beloved is distraught.
Yeah, that's rather elevated.
Editors are looking for techniques like that. They're seeing what your line breaks are. They're seeing where your jamming is. Where are you taking the risk? Where are we willing to be wrong? Today we are going to be talking about how to read and analyze a poem the way that an editor might do the same thing. Alright, so today we're going to be taking a look at a poem by Ellen Bryant Voigt, who is one of my favorite poets of all time. Who used to work down at Warren Wilson, the MFA program down there. The poem we're going to be looking at today is a poem called Moles. I'm just going to read it to get us started. Where's his hat? Where's his horse? Where is his harrier? My beloved is distraught. He made this yard, each blade, each stem, each stalk, except the mounds of fresh dirt, like little graves. It's moles that make the mounds when they make holes. They're worms with fur. The cat does not do moles. She's stalking rooks and mice. Beloved has scattered human hair across the side. It keeps the deer away. He has installed a high-pitched hum in the lily bed. It keeps the dogs out of the yard, who might have otherwise unearthed a mole. Too bad traps don't work the way they do for squirrels. My father used to thrust a hose into one hole and flood them out. My beloved does not care what my father did. This greensward is his joy, his job. My job was children, food, house. The rest of what I did stayed underground. You are scratching your head. Why are you scratching your head?
Trying to figure this one out. This one's not an easy read.
It's not an easy read at first. Her poems, it's one of those things that, like, if you're not used to reading Shakespeare, when you read a sonnet, you're like, what is happening? But then, like, you read, like, 20 sonnets, and you're like, oh, this is, it's this character doesn't like this one girl, but actually does, and things like that. The more you read of her, the more the style kind of comes to life, to a degree. So, it's great, actually, in a lot of ways, that the first read's kind of not hitting, because we're going to kind of, like I said, analyze it the way an editor might. Okay. And the way that I did when I used to be editor at a couple little things, like there was like Fly Paper Mag and then a couple self projects I did. So I'm going to kind of show you the way I would handle it. The way I often read poems when I'm analyzing them is just going heavy line by line. Okay. Before we do that, though, let's just kind of... The very first thing I do, I should say, is I kind of just give it the eye test. So I kind of just hold it out and just kind of see, what am I looking at? It's like, if you just look at this poem on the page, what do you notice?
It looks like there's 4 lines per stanza.
Okay, so there seems to be some structure to it. Okay. Other things you notice?
Beloved seems to be in each stanza.
Okay. You don't even have to go that deep into the minutia. Like, in some ways, like, the less you can read, the better. Like, kind of just literally looking at it visually, like a piece of art or something like that.
Okay.
So what else do you notice?
It's not single space, it's double space.
Okay, double spaced. If I'm just looking at this visually, some things that kind of stand out to me. Okay, so yeah, it looks like, I don't even know if it's double spaced, maybe like 1.5. 3 stanzas. What's the significance of 3, potentially? When you see 3 in a poem, numbers are symbols.
They are. Okay.
Numbers are symbols. For instance, if you see 2 often suggests a union. If you see 3, disbalance. Right?
Okay.
And things like that. So when I say 3 here, there's a bit of discord. However, it's not complete discord, right? Because it's 4 lines per stanza.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Okay. So those are some things that kind of stand out to me. Some other things when I'm doing the eye test that I look at. Shortest line, longest line. Now, in this poem, things are pretty balanced. The longest line is the mounds of fresh dirt, like little graves. It's moles that make the mound. Like, that's our longest line. But it's not, like, drastically longer than anything else. The shortest line is probably, like, the traps don't work the way they do for squirrels, my father. So that's the shortest line. Okay. Because all these things are intentional, right? Ellen had complete control over how to write this poem. She could have done line breaks any way she wanted, but she settled with this.
Okay.
The thing we have to remember, everything is in service to the poem.
Okay.
And if it's not, then that's something that is, in my opinion, worth revisiting. Okay? So including line lengths and things like that. If one of your lines is the shortest line in the poem, why is it the shortest line? One of your lines is suddenly the longest line in the poem. Why is it the longest line? Does it deserve to be? These are things that you have to earn, right?
Okay.
But again, this poem's pretty balanced. You're going to see other poems in journals where like the shortest line's going to be very short. It might even be a single word. You're going to see other poems where everything is short except for one line that like takes up the entire page. So kind of keeping an eye on that. Other questions for me, just kind of about the eye test. Or looking at a poem visually.
Yeah, I noticed that a lot of folks nowadays, they're not doing this type of format as much. They seem to be doing this where, like the garter snake on the other side, or they seem to be doing this
Like
box.
a single block of like text and things like that, and this one is stanzas, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then, or they seem to be doing them in two lines at a time.
Okay. It's like couplets. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
So when we see 4-line, what does this mean to you if we have 4 lines? 4 lines, 4 lines, 4 lines.
Maybe it just means that I would think that if there's 3 stanzas, there's probably 3 main ideas.
So you're expecting each stanza to kind of be a separate kind of box in a way. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I think is important to think about is how the poem falls into the greater poetry world. 12 lines.
Yeah, it makes
What's
me
that
think
close
of a
to?
sonnet.
It's a sonnet, but it's not. This is intentionally not a sonnet, even though it's playing with that.
Right.
Okay.
You don't have the last 2 lines.
Yeah. So then we have to be thinking about what is the significance of having a poem that is almost a sonnet but chooses not to be a sonnet. Because it could have been a sonnet. We could have played around with the line breaks. We could have added some rhyme, but we didn't. So what does that imply if I decide not to turn a 12-line poem into a sonnet? Because we're like 80% there, but we're not.
Right.
Again, we haven't done our analysis of the poem yet, so we don't have answers to these sorts of questions, but these are the sorts of questions if you're analyzing a poem, I think are very helpful to start with. Okay. I think it's also helpful, sometimes you read a poem and it can be really overwhelming with what's happening. Mm-hmm. So these can kind of be grounded ways to enter a piece without that sense of overwhelm.
Okay. Yeah, like a system.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Systems, the nice thing about systems is they remove that emotional shot. Mm-hmm. Because you don't even think about it. You're just like, all right, this is what's step 1, what's step 2, what's step 3, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Moles. Now, when that's done, we look at the title.
Seems kind of boring.
You're saying it sounds kind of boring? Why does it sound kind of boring?
I don't just want a one-word title with moles. I mean, I want something more. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think it's good when you look at art to see what is your emotional reaction to things. Okay, to be like, I like this, I don't like this. One thing I will note, in this collection, there's a lot of sections, there's a lot of poems dedicated to animals. Like there's a poem called Fox, there's a poem called Garter Snake, so there's a poem called Moles. So, if this were in a single poem, not part of the collection.
Did she have a bat poem?
She does have a bat poem.
Yeah, that's when we saw it.
Yeah. So it can be fitting into that theme. I will say potentially that could be a challenge. If you're sending it to an editor, the editor doesn't read the poem, just sees the titles of the poems, they may be thinking, you may have to do more work to earn it. The one thing I will say with moles is when you think of moles, what do you think of?
Moles, like where basically it comes out of the holes and then And then I think there's that game where you pound the moles.
Like whack-a-mole?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
what I think about it.
So like so there's this sense of something coming out of the dirt. Okay.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times when people think of moles, you think of something that's like not
Great, the mole people.
mole people, which kind of leads into what I was going to say is that like there's a sense like a lack of attraction to it. You know, it's not like a dog or a cat.
Yeah.
You may not want to touch it. You know.
Yeah.
Moles, and again, just if I'm approaching the poem without having read the poem, if I look at moles, I also don't know, like, is it the skin, condition and things like that, which potentially can be, like, cancerous and, like, worst-case scenarios and things like that, so when you're looking at a title, all of the associations potentially are valid. We don't know what direction to take it until we actually start reading. Okay. I would also kind of pay attention to, again, what is the reaction you have to it. Like, again, is it positive, is it negative, and things like that. What's kind of the tone that is inspired by the work?
It's kind of neutral to negative because I'm not really interested in moles.
Gotcha. If it's neutral or negative, I would say it's negative.
Okay.
Personally.
Okay.
Okay. So once you've done that, we've done the eye test, we've looked at the title. The next and most important line is going to be the first line. So we have, where is his hat? Where's his horse? Where is his harrier? My beloved. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about this first line? What stands out to you?
There's a lot of questioning.
Okay.
The hat, the horse.
What else do you notice?
The harrier.
So lots of repetition.
It also seems almost like it's written in a different period of time, like kind of like you were saying, like Shakespeare, but not quite Shakespeare, just a very different place.
Why?
Because most people nowadays don't have so much questioning.
Okay, so the questioning is giving you a sense of time. Are there other words or things here that are giving you a sense of time?
I don't know exactly what harrier is.
Harrier.
And then the whole thing about beloved, that makes me think of immortal beloved.
Okay, so the word beloved, harrier. A lot of people don't necessarily have horses. Horses is giving us a place as well.
Yeah. A lot of people don't have hats either.
Yeah. Notice that, like, the poem is very different if it starts with harrier, right? Where is his harrier? Where is his hat? But no, she puts harrier towards the end. Why do you think she did that? She could have ordered this any way she wanted. Why did she order it this way?
Well, I don't know what a harrier is, but I think I think she's going. The first thing people take off is the hat, and then they have a horse. I'm guessing a harrier is some sort of carriage.
I think it's interesting that you keep saying, like, I don't know what a harrier is. I think that's part of the reason why she put it last. She's not necessarily expecting people to know what a harrier is.
Yeah.
If you start with that, where's his harrier? Where's his horse? People... I know I use this analogy a lot, but again, poems. First line of a poem. It's like stepping into a boat. We don't know anything about this boat. If I start you off with something that throws you off too much, I risk losing you. So you won't even read the rest of it. I think the poem in a lot of ways has to start with the hat. It's kind of normal, ordinary. Then it says, where's his horse? Now it starts getting a little weirder, right? When's the last time you had to look for your horse, right?
Never.
And then the last one. Yeah, right?
Well, nor do I have a hat.
And then it gets even stranger. Where's his harrier? So it builds up. I think that's why it starts with hat. I think that's why harrier is the last one. Because I think if it starts with harrier, it risks alienating the reader too fast.
Yeah. The harrier, I'm stuck on that.
Yeah. Notice also even in terms of just like momentum. Where's his hat? Where's his horse? Where's his harrier? Like hat, horse, you have these like one-syllable words. Harrier, you have these multi-syllable words. So it's even just more complicated that way.
It's also slowing it's making the first line go really slow with all that repetition.
Yeah.
Even though there's no commas. But you could put commas in there. And it would slow it down even more.
I think in some ways actually the repetition speeded up. I mean, this is the joys of poems because it's we can interpret things different ways. Because I get like, where's this hat? Where's this horse? Like, I get something that's very frantic, especially that like question. Where's this? Where's this? Where's this?
Actually, that might be kind of like the hare in Alice in Wonderland. Wasn't there like a hare?
There was I think so.
Or something.
That's one of the first creatures she sees, I think. So that's what that first line is doing for me. It's establishing the energy of the beloved. Because I get the sense that's the beloved asking me the question, like, where's my hat? Where's my... And then the speaker's kind of, report his speech.
Okay. Maybe this is more like the way Virginia Woolf kind of writes when she does this. Yeah. And I always wonder why she kind of writes like that, where you don't know exactly what's going on.
The other thing that I see happening in this first line as well is we're introduced to our characters. We get the his, and then we get the my. Okay. So without saying, like, I am this person, he is this person, we are automatically are given a lot of information about their relationship. Right?
Yeah.
It's not just two people. They're in a romantic relationship with each other. Most likely they're adults. If you're asking for your hat and your horse,
Yeah. However, it's very kind of done in a very indirect way.
Yeah. Which is
kind of like Virginia Woolf.
Again, it gets back to that concept, showing versus telling, right? So this is allowing us to infer, which is more rewarding for your readers. They can come to the conclusion without being told the conclusion.
Okay.
That's what this first line is doing. The first line is basically, in this poem, is basically saying, here are the characters, this is the situation.
Okay.
It's putting us right in the middle of the action, too, right? Because this guy's he's looking for something.
Yeah.
Okay. So this first line's done a lot of work in terms of the world building. Questions about that?
Yeah. It's interesting. I think it's not what I guess it's not what I typically expect or what I truly want in a poem. Usually I like the poem to just tell me it, and then I just jump into it. That's how I feel when I read Virginia Woolf, like To the Lighthouse. I feel like there's a lot of confusion, and I have to kind of figure it out. This feels to me like Virginia Woolf.
I see.
Not that I dislike
No,
Virginia
it's fine.
Woolf.
It's okay.
I mean, but if I had a choice between reading Virginia Woolf or, let's just say, The Great Gatsby, I would prefer reading The Great Gatsby because it tells me everything.
It's okay to have references.
And it's
There's
very
nothing
beautiful.
wrong with that. Second line. Okay. So this, by the way, actually before we even talk about that, so these are the things that an editor is thinking about. Visually, title, first line. What is the first line doing? Okay.
So an editor would like this kind of...
Depends on the editor of the journal.
Okay.
If you were the editor, it sounds like you wouldn't like it.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. At least not yet.
Not yet. I don't truly understand this.
Okay. Let's keep going. Is distrust. So notice, editors are looking for what are the devices that are being used as well. It's almost a way of kind of like credential checking. Like, do you know what you're doing, or are you just kind of like just randomly throwing things together? And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. This is a line break. Look at this enjambment. My beloved, line break. Is distraught. Having a line start with is, without the visible subject, right? So you have to read the previous line to go back to it. Okay. Editors are looking for techniques like that. They're seeing what your line breaks are. They're seeing where your enjambment is.
That's a good technique.
Potentially.
Okay. I mean, okay, I like the idea of ending that first line on beloved, because I might do something like that. But this kind of feel of where you're in the middle of something and it's very chaotic is hard. But it's okay.
If you're used to reading kind of like traditional work where it's like complete thought, complete idea, end of line.
Yeah.
Nowadays, especially contemporary poetry, you're seeing a lot more play with that. Because it propels you forward. It propels you forward.
Okay.
You don't have to do it. In your own writing, you don't have to do it. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not there yet in terms of
Gotcha.
experimenting with it.
What I like about having the "my beloved" in that first line is it can feel complete, but then you get to the next line, it's like, oh, this is not actually complete, so it calls you to read again.
Oh. Yeah, it does. I thought that wasn't good.
Because it could have been, where is his Harrier? Question mark. My beloved is distraught. Period. It could have been like that, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I probably would have liked that.
you like the signposts, right?
Yes.
My beloved is distraught. He made this yard, each blade, each stem, each stalk, except. So another thing that's kind of, especially in the first line that I forgot to mention, is some other literary devices that your editor may be looking for. Alliteration or consonants. In this case, we got the consonants with the H sounds. It's like his hat, his horse, his harrier. So that sort of technique.
Mm-hmm.
Again, poems, like when you're sending poems to submit, you're kind of trying to show off. You're like, look how good this poem is. Look at all the things I'm doing. My beloved is distraught. Word choice, right? The editor's going to be looking for your word choices. Do you say my beloved is sad? Do you say my beloved is worried? No, we say my beloved is distraught.
Yeah, that's rather elevated.
Okay.
But it goes with beloved. That's elevated too.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. So the other thing that I was going to be looking for is, are your word choices not only fresh and unique, but is the register consistent? I can see the speaker using all of these words. This is a speaker that uses Harrier. This is a speaker that uses beloved. This is a speaker that uses distraught. If it said, where is, like, you can imagine that this speaker would all say, like, where's his suspenders? Where's his tweed coat? You can kind of imagine all the other objects that would go here, as well as the objects that wouldn't go here, right? Like, where's his Nikes? Doesn't fit as well. Where's his tall tee? It's not fitting as well. So the word choices we make, are they consistent with what our speaker would do?
Okay.
And to me, I think we have some consistency here. I could see the speaker using distraught.
Yeah.
Think it fits?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. So that's another thing that your editor's going to be looking for. Your word choices.
Yeah.
Fresh word choices.
No, it's fresh. That's for sure.
He made this yard. Mm-hmm. Have you ever made a yard before?
How do you mean design a yard?
Well, that kind of gets at the point. So isn't that an interesting phrase? Not like he took care of the yard or like he, did yard work. No, he made this yard.
Yeah, and it almost makes me think like he designed it.
Yeah, I get like Garden of Eden vibes. Like Genesis kind of.
Except for God did it, right?
Yes.
Those two seem kind of lazy.
But there's a sense of being able to create even a small space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is kind of like a Genesis aspect. He made this yard. Each blade, each stem, each stalk. There's kind of like a biblical kind of hearkening going on to a degree, right? So that's another thing your editor is looking for. What are you alluding to?
Okay.
And the allusions don't have to be... Don't feel like you have to include them just to include them. They enrich. Right? It's not just, I'm not just doing this just for fun. I'm doing it because it adds to the poem.
Yeah.
Right? Like in this case, what do we know about Genesis? What happens in the book of Genesis?
Oh, yeah. Basically, the world is created.
And?
Well, okay, the whole universe is created by God.
And what happens to it?
Well, they said it's kind of interesting. You actually have two stories. You have one story where he's creating the universe and everything in 7 days.
How does it end?
It ends with those Adam and Eve getting kicked out of Eve.
Okay, so it doesn't have a happy ending so much, to a degree.
No, but at least they opened their eyes and they were able to see.
I mean, that's what expelled them, though. But so Garden of Eden.
Free will.
Yeah.
So at least they now have free will.
So the Garden of Eden implies that there's going to be a negative. The creation comes, but things aren't going to be perfect forever. Mm-hmm. This story, this line is doing the same thing. Is distraught. He made this yard. Each blade, each stem, each stalk, except. There's a lot of parallelism here with kind of the Genesis story.
Wow.
You know, because like in the Genesis story, you have the snake.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, they don't mention God making the snake. The snake kind of appears, right?
Right.
And ultimately leads to the corruption.
Yeah.
And in this case, what does he not make? He doesn't make the mounds of dirt. He doesn't make the moles.
Right. That's why he's upset.
And this is why he's upset. Do you see what's happening here? So there's a lot of kind of like little parallels going on.
Okay.
Now, if someone's not versed in religion or they haven't read Genesis before, that's okay. You can still like do the poem. You know, it's not like you have to be thinking about that.
Yeah.
But if someone is versed in religion and they are familiar with like the story of Genesis, well, then this becomes even more rewarding.
Yeah, I could see that, but I could also see that I wouldn't have got to Genesis reading this.
That's the beauty of the poem, because you can bring whatever you want to it.
Okay, because I wouldn't have gotten there. I would have just, I don't know, I would have been like stumped by the first line and the way everything's kind of.
I see.
It would have been a stumbling block for me.
There's always going to be things in poems that we miss. And it could also be that there's also things to the poems that we add. So it could very well be she wasn't thinking about Book of Genesis when she was. However, when I make the argument, you can also see the argument, right? So we can transform art to what we need it to be.
Okay.
You know? Mm-hmm. So it's not like an either or, it's a yes and, you know? Mm-hmm. One of the things that I think is really helpful here too is kind of like it's almost like writing an email to a degree. You know, so if I'm writing like a business email, you know, you're high up in business, you get this. I can't just like spend an hour, like a whole paragraph, just like doing extra information. No, it's like, what's the point of the email? Why are you sending this to me? Mm-hmm. Okay. I think with poems, we want to make sure that we have that kind of sense of urgency in general from the beginning. There's always exceptions, but like from these first 2 lines, I can already detect tension. Right? The first line starts like, where's this hat? Where's this horse? Where's this hair? There's that sense of looking for something.
Yeah.
Right? So there's already a little bit of tension there. And then the next one, my beloved is distraught. You know? Yeah. So now we know a couple of things. We know how one character feels, and it's emotionally, you know, not good. Right? Mm-hmm. But then we also know the speaker doesn't say they're distraught. They say, my beloved is distraught. Mm-hmm. It almost kind of feels to me like that sense of like, you see like people in relationships and like one person's the worrier and one person's just like, they're just worrying. And I'm like, just let them be. You know, it's not that big a deal. You know?
Sure.
I'm not saying that's how this relationship is, but you could interpret it.
Looks it. He reminds me of one of my neighbors that I had across the street who took care of like every single blade of grass.
Some people are really hardcore.
Yeah, he would have this problem if a mole wasn't on there.
There's also kind of a sense of. Let me pause there. In just the first 2 or 3 lines, what are the central tensions that have become evident?
It seems like he's like, his whole world is completely displaced and he's distraught just because these moles are like breaking up his beautiful yard. Okay.
I agree, that's one tension. Are there other tensions?
Yeah, basically his beloved doesn't seem to be bothered by it. Mm-hmm. And it looks like she's just kind of watching him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, the tensions I see are very much aligned. I see a little bit of tension between the couple in terms of how they respond emotionally to a situation. So there seems to be a disconnect.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. The speaker is deliberately separating themselves from the feeling of being distraught. Very clear that this is his. This is not my
Right.
distro. Right. The other tension I see is control. You have the he who desires control and has lost it.
Right.
He's lost it. He can't find his things, so there's a lack of control over his things. And also there's a lack of control over what's happening in the yard, even though he's labored over it so heavily. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So notice that again, we're 3 lines in, we've already started with some action, and we've already identified central characters, and we've already identified central tensions that are probably going to be recurrent throughout this, just in the first 3 lines.
Okay.
We don't have time to waste. If you're starting the email, let me know why you're writing the email. If you're putting me in the poem, let me know why are we in this poem.
Okay.
Again, this is generality, but something editors are going to be kind of looking for, because editors are putting together journals. They know their readers and their audience, and your poem, when it's in the journal, is going to be competing with other poems in the journal, right? So it's like, so what's going to keep people wanting to read through the rest of your poem?
Okay.
You could have the best ending in the world, but if people don't get there, it's not the best poem in the world.
Yeah. This kind of sense of chaos that I'm seeing here
Yeah.
is very similar to the husband character in the To the Lighthouse. Because this is what I'm seeing when I'm talking about Virginia Woolf. I'm just seeing To the Lighthouse, and I'm seeing this is how the main characters, I think it's Mr. Banks, right? How he comes in, he starts off like firing stuff. And it's all that disarray, and it's all about the relationship.
Yeah, so there's a lot of immediate tension, right?
But it doesn't tell you things directly.
No.
It's kind of like, I don't know.
You have to earn it. You have to read through it.
You have to think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you won't get it.
Right. I'm trying to get it.
Yeah. The mounds of fresh dirt, like little graves, it's moles that make the mounds. Okay. There's some bold decisions here. So let's go back to like another craft point. Is there anything in this line that kind of sticks out to you from a craft perspective? Because there's something that stands out to me a lot.
Yeah. This part about the mounds of fresh dirt, like little graves. That's like an interesting metaphor. And then how it then circles back to then say that the moles are the ones who make the mounds, just to re-emphasize that part.
Yeah.
And then how they then go back again, loop back, and go back to the holes again, saying that they're worms with fur.
So slow down. We're not even there. Yet.
Okay.
The thing, from a craft perspective, the thing that draws my attention a lot in this third line is, what are the first 2 words?
Mounds.
What are the last 2 words?
The mounds.
That's a pretty bold move.
That is?
Because typically, there's an idea in writing that if you repeat a word, you shouldn't repeat it, it gets weaker.
Okay.
A general idea. And in general, pretty solid advice to kind of follow. I think I've highlighted this in some of your poems before, where it's like we want to try to...
Yeah.
Most often we want to try to limit the repetition. Okay.
Right.
So, Ellen Bryant Voigt is aware of that. And what does she do? She intentionally not only repeats, but repeats in the same exact line. It's a risk. Like, stylistically, that's a risk. Because some people will see that and be like, nah, same word to it, nah, not doing that. But then some people are like, okay. Like, so I think the question if we're trying to apply this to our own work more, is where is the moment where we take a risk that could either sink the poem or elevate it? To me, it works. To me, it strengthens the poem. But this is a subjective exercise too, So some editors might really like that, some editors might not like it. So that decision right there Like, for instance, if you were the editor, it might have been like, you know what? No, I'm not. So it would have been cut.
I don't like it.
Okay. And that's fine. So that's why decisions like this are a risk. Because there's going to be some audience members that are like, no, I'm not. Whereas some audience members are going to be, oh, that's really good. Because, like, there's not many poems I've read that have done that. Where the first couple words and the last couple words are repeated.
Yeah, I haven't seen that.
You know? Mm-hmm. So, that to me is very striking and unusual. And it stands out.
Yeah, this whole first stanza stands out for me.
You know? So,
yeah.
Again, applying it to our own work, where are you taking the risk?
Okay.
Where are we willing to be wrong? Because if we play it safe all the time, you know, safe poems don't go anywhere.
Okay.
At some point, we gotta venture out.
Okay.
And then we get this line: "That make the mounds when they make holes, they're worms with fur, the cat."
That's weird.
What's weird about it?
It's almost like reverse talk, kind of like Yoda talk, you know, in Star Wars. Mm-hmm. Which actually is probably like Shakespearean kind of. That's probably where they got it.
There's a lot of transformation that happens in this line, right? Because if you read it passively, you're like, the moles, when they make holes, they're worms. So the moles become worms. And not just worms, become worms with fur. And then, in a sense, if you read it passively and don't really think much about it, then they become this, the cat, right? Yeah. So it's like, so there's like, mentally, like, you're kind of doing these gymnastics, like, okay, a mole, no, it's a worm, no, it's a worm with fur, no, it's a cat. Wait a minute, that doesn't make sense that a mole is a cat. So then, the cat, you know that the cat, we're starting a new line, right? The cat does not do moles, but we have the line break. Mm-hmm. The cat, line break, does not do moles. Mm-hmm. Right. So there's a lot of this momentum, and it's, again, one of those things that if you read it passively, if I really concentrate, you read it, and you're like, wait, it doesn't make sense, let me read it again. And it's like, oh, this is now it makes...
Yeah. This just seems to me like it's To the Lighthouse. Just that kind of style. I'm getting the feel of that. Aren't you getting that?
I think it's great. I love this stuff.
I mean, but are you getting the feel of like To the Lighthouse?
I haven't read that since,
you need to read it.
I have read it, but I just haven't read it in...
I haven't read
15 years?
Yeah, I haven't read it in a long time.
And it obviously did not stand out to me drastically.
I mean, that's probably when I read it, like 10 years ago.
Yeah. But there's a lot of gymnastics, and this is, again, where the enjambment comes in. Mm-hmm. You know, so it's an intriguing line break. Like, where does the line cohesively end in terms of the thought? And if you're not used to reading it, it can take a minute to be like, oh, this is where the period will go, this is where there'd be a comma, and stuff like that. But without the guidance of punctuation, suddenly we're on our own. Right?
I need it. I need the punctuation. Okay.
So, I think one of the, because I know we're already getting pretty late, I think one of the last questions is a stylistic question. So we gave it like the eye test at the beginning. This is a poem without punctuation. How is that in service to the poem? Because punctuation is a tool. If you're just using punctuation, just use punctuation. I don't think that's a great approach for using punctuation. If you're using punctuation, there's a reason for it. If you're not using punctuation, there's a reason for it.
Okay.
Don't just use it just to use it. Like, be intentional. Always be intentional. Right?
Okay.
It's a choice.
Yeah.
So,
I almost always use punctuation.
Okay. I'm not saying stop using punctuation, but I'm saying start investigating why you're using punctuation and how is that serving the piece.
Okay.
This poem does not have punctuation. We haven't read the whole poem. How does not having punctuation, you think, serve what she's trying to do in writing this poem? Or do you think it doesn't serve?
Well, I think not having punctuation is serving the poem but it's serving the poem because it's so that the reader is able to, in a way, decide the way they want to read it.
Okay, so it opens up interpretations. Okay, like we saw that, like if you had punctuation, that last line, the transformations would become much less. Right, it wouldn't be possible for the mole to also become a cat, or not as easily. Whereas without the punctuation, the transformation becomes more possible. It's a little bit more surreal, right? So I think that's one thing. It opens up interpretations. That's one of the reasons why I don't like using punctuation, because I think it opens things up a lot more.
Oh, you don't use punctuation?
In general, not much.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But you used to.
I did used to, yeah. I used to do form and all kinds of things. You have to be tricky if you don't use punctuation, because you can lose people if you don't do it well.
Right.
You know, even if you do it well, you're going to lose some people.
Getting lost with this one.
Right. The other thing that I think helps not having punctuation here, I think it adds to the kind of like the frantic nature of it.
Yeah.
And the lack of control.
Yeah.
That the beloved's going through. Because as a reader, you also kind of lack the control. Although there's a degree of control, right? Because it's, it's quatrains that are all roughly the same length. So there is an order to this, but it's disrupted.
Yeah, it's like the order of what the beloved
exactly
has, however it's being disrupted by the chaos of the moles.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it fits. But again, the larger question applying to your own work is ask yourself, if I have punctuation in this piece, how is it in service to what I'm trying to do? Is it in service? Because it might actually be counterproductive. Which could be a good thing, too, because it could be irony. We talked about irony before.
Yeah.
But it may also be something you just didn't even think about when you were writing. Right.
Yep.
All right. I may pause us about here.
Okay.
Because I think that already kind of gives you some things to be considering in your own poems, when you're reading poems, analyzing poems. Questions for me about anything we discussed here?
Yeah, my impression of this is a certain style, and like I said, I know I've said it many times. It's just reminding me of The Lighthouse, where you just kind of do this stream of consciousness thing, and then you kind of don't directly describe what is going on, and the reader has to pause and try to figure out what's going on. Mm-hmm. That's how it strikes me.
Mm-hmm. Other questions, thoughts, concerns?
It just kind of, to me, it's very hard to read because I'm trying to figure out what's going on.